President Houston had resolved one crisis only to create another. Suddenly, hundreds of soldiers were free as the air and loose on the countryside. Since most were Americans, some booked passage back to the United States, never to return. Many, however, had nothing waiting for them back home and cast their lot with the Texians. The furloughed soldiers were young men who, for the most part, lacked money, skills, or connections. But following months of want and inactivity, they did have a thirst to quench, steam to blow off, and wild oats to sow. Houston sounded like their kind of town. The discharged warriors descended on the new capital like a plague of locusts. In most cases, however, it was they who found themselves stripped clean. Unscrupulous civilians were eager to exploit the desperation and gullibility of these young men. Many still had hay in their hair and cotton in their heads. Suddenly they found themselves among hard-nosed hucksters with their feet on the ground and their hands in a rube's pocket. Houston's upper crust citizens soon began describing the furloughed soldiers as rowdy loafers. Vagabond volunteers were undesirable. Rowdy because they were young men with too much time on their hands, and loafers as a result of government policy. Now that Texians no longer required U.S. volunteers, they had cast them out like a worn-out brogan. Soldiers had answered the call. They had suffered privation and want. Now, all they had to show for their service were worthless land scripts. Discharged warriors became estranged from the Texas establishment, who, at least in their eyes, had bilked them. As Houston resident Francis Lubbock described their situation,
the Army was being furloughed in the winter of 1837 and 1838 and finally disbanded. This brought a large number of soldiers to the city. Consequently, there was much dissipation, gambling, and fighting.
their behavior appalled Congressman Kelsey Douglas, who complained,
Drinking, fighting, and wrangling is the order of the day at this place.
almost all of them went about heavily armed, as Lubbock insisted.
It must be borne in mind the country was just emerging from a war that had been going on for a long while. Every man, with but a few exceptions, had been in the army and bore arms, and the few civilians outside the military were in the habit of going armed. So people were ready to resent insult and wrong without waiting for the slow process of the law. Hence, many personal difficulties occurred.
Unburdened with most of the world's goods, rare was the discharged soldier who did not retain at least one firearm. So ubiquitous was a particular weapon that it became a sartorial requisite. According to English visitor Matilda Houston, most men she encountered in the Texas Republic sported a specific weapon.
The Texans, almost without exception, carry their national weapon, the bowie knife, about them.
Irish diplomat Francis C. Sheridan also corroborated that throughout the country, the use of the bowie knife is in general among high and low. Dr. John Washington Lockhart recollected,
It was very common to see men passing on the streets with from 2 to 4 pistols belted around them, with the addition of a large bowie knife.
observing the brutality that constituted the capital's daily life, hundreds of prospective Houstonians opted to settle elsewhere. Town officials were willing to allow a degree of boisterous conduct so long as roisterers confined their shenanigans to prescribed areas. But that was the problem. Early Houston did not have a district set aside for gainful vice. It was, in every sense of the term, a wide open town. As Constable Edward Stiff chronicled,
"Pickpockets in every description of bad characters are around here and are in promiscuous confusion mingled with the virtuous part of the community. So much is the case that a man can scarcely divine when or where he is safe from their depredations."
on March 28, 1838, city officials sought to curb the raucous passions of the loafers by stringing up two of them. A Houston court found two Texas Army veterans guilty of murder and sentenced them to hang. The condemned were John Christopher Columbus Quick and David James Jones. The case of Jones was especially poignant. He had escaped the Goliad massacre, only to perish at the end of a judicial rope. Between 2,000 and 3,000 Houstonians watched the pair meet their maker. One citizen found the executions of Quick and Jones an opportunity for edification.
Their fate suggests many solemn and awful reflections to the passionate and vicious.
Houston's upper crust hoped that a public execution would send a message to the other rowdy loafers plaguing the town. Yet, if the idlers ever received it, they soon forgot its contents. On May 11, 1839, a reporter for the Morning Star protested,
"Loafers have increased and are increasing and ought to be diminished. District Court in session. Crimes and criminals are undergoing scrutiny. Hope it will have some effect on the loafers."
In the end, however, the example of Quick and Jones made little or no impression on Houston's criminal underclass. In 1839, the Republic's officials moved the capital to Austin. The loafers, gamblers, and prostitutes remained. They soon forgot the lessons of the gallows and disproved one optimistic resident's prediction that the hangings would promote the public peace. Ultimately, brawls, dissipation, or yellow fever ended the heyday of the rowdy loafers. But until then, public peace in Houston proved elusive.